So today we got a John Deere LX178. It's got the 15 horsepower liquid cooled V-twin Kawasaki engine. Same style as the 17 horse. It's also in the LX289 and I believe John Deere some 300 series motors. Anyway, this thing's been blowing out a puff of smoke every time I start it, which goes away after a few seconds and doesn't really burn a whole lot of oil when it's running, just that first startup. So that tells me that the valve seals are probably worn out, and when it sits after you shut it off, there's oil that follows the seal, the stem of the valve, down into the cylinder as it sits, so that when you start it up there's a couple of drips of oil in there, and that's all it takes to make a nice big cloud of smoke. So we're gonna get to taking this off. We'll take this valve cover off, and then we will get into how to take the valve springs off and replace the valve seals. Alright, so the first step, take this valve cover off. Just those 4 bolts. Then we've got the rocker arms. There's a C-clip up top there, a snap ring I should say. So first off though, we got to get it at top dead center so that there's no tension on the valve springs. The easiest way I found is to go under, grab the drive belt and spin that around by hand until you can see that there's no tension on those springs. So one's going down there, right about there, and I can feel a little bit of play on both, so I know there's no tension on it, and I can take it off without it springing back at me. So we'll take our snap ring pliers, crappy Harbor Freight snap ring pliers with that. Take that off, and then be careful not to drop anything. Once you slide that out, you can remove the top rocker arm. The bottom one, I just leave it on the little pin there so I remember which one was on the bottom. Okay, so the next step is pretty simple too. There's no clips. All you have to do is just gently push down and slide it to the bigger hole, and the spring comes right off. The next step, so just grab some needle-nose pliers, gently grab onto that valve seal, and they usually pop right off. That's it. The old one is very worn out. The hole is a lot bigger. Anyway, I want to kind of clean that valve off a little, make sure it moves freely in the bore, which this one does. Then get a little oil on the new one, and then very gently hold the valve so it doesn't go in. Pop that on there. Once the new seal is on the stem, hold the other end and slide it further on, and then these things, they just go on by hand. Give it a nice push, but that's it. Now you can actually feel a little resistance from that seal on the valve when you move it in and out, which I could not before. Next step is take your valve spring and simply push it back on through the bigger hole over the little one. Give it a few presses and make sure it's seated properly. That's it. We'll just do the same thing for the other valve. Slide it over, pull it off, pop the old seal off, Grab another new one. Clean that valve off a little. Make sure there's no scoring or anything on it. Seems to be moving just fine. Get a little oil on the new one. Gently, you don't want to score that valve. Gently hold it, just enough to slide that over there. Hold the other end. Get it on the valve and then pop it on. That's it. Take your valve spring, get it in the right spot, line it up with the hole. Make sure it's on good. There you go. Pretty simple, really. A little tricky to get the rocker arm assembly back on. So I found if you line it up with the valve, just push the valve down a little, you can slide your push rod right in there. Same thing. Well, actually, this one's even easier. You can line it up and then slide it through. And all you need to do, take your snap ring, get your crappy Harbor Freight snap ring pliers, put it in there, make sure that is in all the way. That's it. One other thing that I want to do is clean up the sealing surface for the new valve cover gasket, because this was also, as you can see, leaking some oil down onto the exhaust. So we'll clean that off with some Scotch-Brite. Alright, wipe that off so it's nice and clean. Get your valve cover, clean that off. Take your old valve cover gasket out. Get your new one. Get it all lined up. Pressed in the cover, and then very carefully making sure the new gasket doesn't fall out of that groove. Press it up against there. Get a couple of the bolts in there hand tight so you know that little gasket doesn't fall out or get crushed when it slides out of the groove. Never use an impact on plastic valve cover bolts to tighten them. Always hand tight. And I don't know what the torque spec is on this, but I'm going to go with snug. Just do an X pattern. Get them all snug. And then give them one more little crank to tighten them down. And that's it. You just did a job that John Deere dealer would probably charge you several $100s for. One last thing. When you start this thing up, it's probably going to smoke a little even more than it did before, because you've been in there working with the oil and the valves. So let it run for a while, let it clear out all the smoke, and then you'll be able to tell a difference after you run it a few times. So you'll start it up and it won't be a mosquito fogger. Thanks for watching.